Hey, welcome everybody. This is the Reverend Canon Michael Dean Vinson, and I'm the rector of St. Benedict's Anglican Church in Rockwell, Texas. And I also have the pleasure of serving as the Canon Missioner for the Diocese of Mid-America. And so we're having a series of videos where we're talking with fellow planters in REC 100. We'll get into that in just a minute. And our first fellow church planter that I'm happy to bring to you today is Father Alex Marlowe. Father Alex, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you for being so brave and jumping out there to be the first one to sign up. I'm not sure people were hesitant, they didn't know what they were going to get into, but thank you for being brave and courageous, being
Oh,
the
you're
first one
welcome.
to be on the Zoomcast here.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, look, I want to take advantage of the time we have, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do want to get to some. First of all, just kind of you and maybe your background, just personally in the context of kind of being led into church planning and how God worked in that. I think it's good to give other people and planters context. And I'd like to do that. And maybe you could maybe just start there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so for me, this is a bit of a family business, actually. I was raised in a church planting context. My parents were missionary church planters. My dad is ordained Presbyterian minister.
Okay.
I grew up all over the place. He went to seminary. They felt called to French language ministry. So I was actually, my parents are from the States, but my dad went to seminary in Aix-en-Provence in the south of France. So I was
Okay.
born there, and my earliest memories were Quebec, French Canada. My dad planted a church there, and then they felt called to overseas missions, not just North American internationally. So we ended up um, moving to Senegal, West Africa.
Right.
And so I grew up internationally until, in that kind of context, until I was about 15 when we came back to the States long term. So jump ahead several decades at this point
Sure.
then.
Yeah.
It's, my wife and I were newly married. We kind of stumbled into a traditional Anglican church and really loved it, got really involved, and ended up going into postulancy, seminary, ordination. And so I was ordained a deacon in 2022, and
Okay.
I immediately began a curacy um, at All Saints Parish in Wilmington, North Carolina. This was in the Anglican Province of America, APA, one of the REC's communion partners.
Right.
And I was the curate there for 3 years under Bishop David Haynes, who's the missionary bishop of the APA, and just the best guy. If you're listening out there, you're looking for a curacy, the best guy to be a curate under for a lot of reasons. Um, and then we kind of knew going in that it was going to be like a 3 year stint. And we started looking around, and I knew a little bit about the REC 100
Okay.
because in Atlanta, I had run into Father Tony Melton a couple of times when he was planting Christ the King in Marietta. So I knew him a little bit, not well, and I knew I needed a job. And so I called him up and said, "Could you just tell me a little bit about the REC?" And we talked for about an hour. And at the end of the hour, he goes, "Alex, would you like a job?" And I went, "Oh, probably. I didn't know
Right.
you were going to ask me that today. Let me talk to my wife." And
Right.
I called him back the next day, and he said, "There's this church plant in formation. We're looking for a priest in Johnson City, Tennessee. Would you be interested?" So over the next couple of months, we went down to the core. There was a core group in place, a small core group in place. It wasn't like a pure parachute, which was nice.
Mm-hmm.
We met the families involved. We have another retired priest involved already, who retired Army chaplain, so he's on board with us too. And we prayed about it a lot, and we said, let's go plant a church.
Right. And here
That's
you are. Yeah,
yeah.
so that's a thank you. That's a great, wonderful kind of a lot of years compressed into a short amount of time, but I think a couple things jump out at me. So, your cross-cultural background, just in your natural upbringing, being in the environment, obviously of a very Christian family, a missional family, but how is that cross-cultural experience? I mean, how has that played into kind of what's on the ground and what's happening now in your own mission? I mean, what connection do you make there?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of connections. One of the things I didn't mention was before I was ordained, I actually worked for my dad at Mission to the World for 8 years. I was
Oh,
part of
okay.
the training the missionary training team, and so that was one of our main focuses. And so, you know, um, that was really helpful because I think when you go to a place like where we are, we're in the Tri-Cities area of East Tennessee, Appalachia. There's a lot of cultural roots, and I'm kind of a cultural chameleon anyway because I grew up all over the place.
Yep.
I was never going to pass for Senegalese or anything. You kind of used to being, um, and I realized very quickly when I got here. We haven't been here that long, but very quickly I've got to learn the culture. I've got to have what we used to call in my old context cultural informants. So I just started meeting people, getting connected to people. Some people were interested in the church plant. Some people were just people that I had people in our church plant said, talk to this guy. And if they were, the longer they had been in Tennessee, if they were from Tennessee, so much the better. I just started right on the ground at the beginning of June, just started taking them for coffee and just asking questions. And I think that's been helpful in a lot of ways, just kind of recognizing, not just the cultural landscape, but the church landscape, the religious landscape. We're in very heavily Free Will Baptist
Hmm.
country, and there's deep roots there. So, in an Anglican context, usually, you can kind of lead out with, well, we have this historic church connection, and that's kind of a draw.
Right.
Well, I don't really have that draw because everyone, somebody said, one of my guys that I had coffee with, he said, their grandfathers went to these churches. So
Right.
as far
So they feel there's a rootedness in
there's
history
a
of their
rootedness.
own
And
family. Yeah.
so, yeah, so you really have to, build the trust, I
Mhm.
find, build the relationship. And a lot of it is just, walking around on my collar and just conversing with people
Right.
and kind of casually dropping. The nice thing about going around in collar or cassock is because, you don't have to wheedle in that you're a pastor or a priest. That's
Right.
obvious.
Yeah.
And
You
then you
know.
kind of drop conversations and you say, "Hey, where do you go to church?" Oh,
Mhm.
that's you're the oh, you work with the youth pastor at the local Baptist church. I passed that.
Mhm.
A lot of it is just some of these people probably aren't going to come to our church plant, but it's just
Yeah.
building cultural credibility
Hmm.
and also
Like
kind
that.
of in a context where they may not be as familiar with liturgical churches. There are a few around here, but
Mhm.
not that many. Also, just kind of saying like, "Hey, I'm a normal guy. I can talk, and
Right.
I'm not weird."
Right. Yeah. That
Not
and
that
that's
weird, maybe.
that's such a great no. That's such a great point. Like the tip of the spear. So just for context, so you and your family have, I mean, relatively early into this plant. I mean, how long have you guys really been going?
Uh, we got here in June.
Okay.
We did a very compressed residency in Atlanta with Christ the King beginning in March.
Right.
So I was coming here a couple times a month, but so I came on officially in March, but I didn't hit the ground permanently until June. So this is still kind of
Right.
relatively new, exactly.
Right. So for for context in terms of planting and for people out there, if you look at the horizon of a church plant, I mean, you are really at the beginning of the gathering stage,
Yeah.
right? And so that's where you're at. You're not meeting weekly yet, really in any formal context. We'll get into that here in just a bit. But what I was going to say is, the tip of the spear really in the beginning of a plant like yours and gathering, I mean, it's really you going and engaging and you and your family engaging. And it's a lot of engagement. It's a lot of personal time with people, finding places, getting involved in things. When you start talking about cultural questions and trying to understand and read, we call it like cultural exegesis, which is really a fancy way of saying, hey, who the heck am I with here in this culture and community, and what do they really desire, and what's going on here? What are some of the key things, like when you're really like exegeting, when you're looking at that town, its history, but you're thinking about the people? Maybe what are, as you're engaging with the people, because that's what the ministry is, people. It's not, hey, we're planning in the city, or no, we're trying to reach people. I mean, what are some of the things that are kind of coming up in terms of like not just their backgrounds, but like what are you seeing as like shared values, shared needs? Where are the entry points into the people in that specific context in Johnson City?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I've noticed so far. I mean, the whole area is generally, um, for lack of a better word, culturally conservative
Hmm.
still. And so, there's family values, and a lot of, like we said, a lot of people have roots about that. So, kind of recognizing that. There are also, the term that I've heard someone else use is, there's also pain points. This is an area where there's some of the opioid crisis is hitting.
Yeah.
The big thing that's happened since last year was it was heavily damaged by the hurricane
Mm,
and floods.
right.
So we've been talking even about as a core group, well, how can we get involved in some service projects? I have somebody who's helped me who works with Appalachian service projects who kind of took me around the area and, there's line next to the river with all these RVs lined up. And he said, these all used to be houses. So kind of recognizing um, just some of the hardships and the pain points and where we can again whether it's not so much whether we can be whether every single person is going to come to our church plant, but
Right.
cultivating a parish mentality.
Yeah.
I like one of the things my old rector said in Wilmington was he said, we're the Anglican parish for these three counties. They're all members of our parish, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, that's exactly what and that's the same
Yeah.
approach that I took. We call it the parish mile. And
Yeah.
so, wherever that center is that you're beginning the plant, like for you, it's a kind of a public place where you guys meet, or it's the planter's home. Like we think of that, the mile, quote unquote, is like everybody within this circumference is God's and it's ours. They're in our parish. I think that's a really smart way to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think in terms of engaging, I mean, maybe this is helpful for other planters. If you're a very structured personality like me,
Hmm.
one of the things that is it can be a challenge, but then it can also be an opportunity is that you kind of learn how to restructure your workday. Because I'm structured, like as a curate at an established church, I had office hours.
Hmm.
I don't have that now. Now, because I'm structured, I can make my to-do list and say, all right, I'm going to have this many conversations this week, or I'm going to go out to this many places. But then also, also part of my work hours, quote unquote, is, or we're having people over for dinner tonight.
Hmm.
So, that's going to be a 3 or 4 hour
That's
commitment.
right. Yep.
Um, so just learning how to kind of structure your so-called workday in a church planting ministry, um, it can take a little bit of reformatting, but then kind of once you get the hang of it, it's it can be also be kind of fun.
Yeah, and I want to, if we can, I want to camp here for a minute because
Yeah.
this is a part of planting, especially at the gathering phase. I think Canon Tony, that you mentioned, Tony Melton, obviously a friend of ours, friend of mine. Um, he's really big on you've got to set goals in terms of networking goals and contact goals. You need to have so many contacts, defining what a meaningful contact is in a week, for a month. A lot of people think that church planners are kind of like freewheeling, kind of well, we are maybe entrepreneurial, but fly by the seat of your pants. There's a lot of discipline that, in my opinion, that goes into planting a church. And you talked about structuring your day. I mean, if you that's just your nature. But if you don't do that, and set your blocks of time on Mondays and Wednesdays and different things, I think it can come back to bite you. I mean, do you set how formally do you think about in terms of contacts and how do you gauge your, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, production or your fruitfulness in any given week? What are you looking for in terms of benchmarks?
I'm kind of trying to take at this stage, and my answer might be different in 6 months. We'll
Yeah.
see. But right now I'm trying just a little bit of everything. So so many days out, around the community, just so I can have just casual, cold conversations.
Mhm.
A lot of that can be as simple as going to get I have a rotation of coffee shops that I go to. So if I need to do computer work, I go and do my office work there. And I'm kind of becoming a known face, learning names. But those types of situations, I also have like a master contact list.
Good.
So we have people who, if you email me or text me, I'm going to put you on the list and say, so and so asked about this. We had a conversation. Follow up with that. I'll go back and update. We had dinner. Um, secondary and tertiary contacts. I've had people in our core group say, look, if you know somebody who's worth talking to, please reach out to them. And that's actually how I ended up finding some of my initial cultural exegesis.
Hmm.
So just a little bit of everything, reaching out to people who, by phone or email who, I wouldn't have necessarily run into,
Right.
but people have given me a contact for. And then a lot of it is also just cold conversations, getting used to the people in the area. At this stage, early enough too, I've really tried to get in touch with other pastors in the area.
Yeah.
That's been really helpful. We've had several pastors of established churches in the area who've been very welcoming to us, very kind, very generous. Also, great cultural point because kind of they've ministered to this area for a while,
Hmm.
and even just getting on that, it's different denominations, so we're on the same side, but we're also different enough that we kind of recognize, like, okay, you're doing this over here. So if I find somebody who's looking for that, I'll send them to you, and the other way around.
Yeah.
So I think I've really appreciated that, and I think I reached out to several pastors at the beginning and just saying, look, I'm not coming to your church to steal or recruit, but I just want to learn from you, and that has been really helpful as well.
Yeah, I think you make a really important point. I do think it's really valuable, and I also think it's God honoring to extend friendship, try to engage and get to know other pastors in the community. I mean, it can be a little self-serving in some respects because you need to have contacts. I've found it in planting that a lot of those guys that I got to know that were very welcoming to what we were trying to do ended up helping us with, like, hey, you can use our church on Sunday evenings, and hey, we're going to do a community barbecue together. Let's get our groups together. I mean, I think it's really helpful to try and make friends. Not everybody's going to want to be your friend, but I think it's the right spirit.
Yeah, we found that actually one of the things we did initially is we didn't have enough of a group to join the local church softball league,
Hmm.
but neither did Bethlehem Lutheran, which is the LCMS congregation in town,
Right.
and I made good connections with the pastor there is just fantastic. And so we had a combined Anglican Lutheran softball team that we played. We just did our last game for the season last week. So even those types of community
Right.
engagements. I think one of the things in in a context like ours, in like a traditional Anglican context, is we're we're very aware of our strengths in a lot of ways. The traditional liturgy, the historic continuity with the church, and the painting with a broad brush. I think the challenge in our situation is that you can get a little confident
Mm.
and say, "Oh, we have it all together over here." Those guys, and actually coming in as a church planter, like I've kind of learned, it's been good because like you have to kind of assume this posture of humility
Right.
and go to these other people and these other churches and just say, "I need help. I need to learn from you. Will you help us?" And
Yeah, that
that's
man, you are so right, Alec. And that spirit of humility, and I really appreciate Bishop Sutton's how he's helped me embrace this. We have a gift, a tradition. There's so many good things that we enjoy, especially as Anglicans in the REC, but we don't really have all of it, and so that graciousness actually towards our brothers and sisters in other parts of the church becomes a very effective or an ineffective apologetic with your people. how we speak of our fellow Christians in other branches of the church really can either help us or hurt us. And I've seen some people, where hey, we've got it all together. Why are you going to that big box church and blah, 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 blah. And that turns a lot of people off. So I think there's something to that humility and just being, and I think that's an Anglican charism. Like we're not the whole church, we're part of it. I mean, have you come across that with people coming to you guys from, I'm sure they're coming from other parts of the church and different traditions.
Yeah, I have. And I think one of the other reason why I've been really conscientious of that, I think, again, as a new, I think this would be applicable to an established Anglican church as well. But particularly here, people ask questions. And again, this kind of ties in a little bit too with the locality here. It might be different in a larger urban area to some degree, but these people have good relationships with their families, and maybe they're looking for something a little bit more that we can offer, but they're not looking to de-church their
Right.
parents or dishonor their parents. And so just explaining, explaining what we are about in the positive sense, this is what we do, this is what we value, not, oh, those guys over there don't know anything. Um, Coming from both my wife and I came from non-Anglican backgrounds, and I think we've both been in situations at various points in our ministry where that could be a little off-putting, and you could hear all of a sudden these very um, negative stereotypes about other Christians, and
Yep.
we're sitting there going, that's my family member actually. They're,
Right. Yeah.
so
I, I know. It can be difficult.
expression and presentation of what we're doing, not just a negative uh, presentation, is what I would say is really important in any pastoral context. But I think anything that applies in an established parish, basically you multiply it by 10 to 20 in a church plant.
Yeah. And so I think so just to kind of like take a little checkpoint here. So there's kind of a theme, talking about your engagement being the tip of the spear in terms of the one who's kind of leading the procession into the community to try and gather people, engage with people, but then also embodying the humility of like, well, how should we think of ourselves in humility as Anglicans, and how should we think of other people in the church that aren't with us, and how do we think of non-believers? So there's this theme where like the planter really embodies and models what he wants the mission to imitate and to be. And that doesn't ever really change, but sometimes you don't think about how important it is even from day one. Like you kind of have to embody what the mission is and who you are and what you want to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And then I think I would add, then you have to go from that, and you're the point person as the planter, but then you have to equip the others.
That's right.
Uh,
Bring them
we've
up.
had, yeah, we've had kind of I was some people looked at me like almost like I was cheating because I got in with an assisting priest right off the bat.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Father
Cheated.
Mike Ducharme, who is just retired from the Army chaplain, and he's just the best guy to work with.
Mm.
And the other thing is, of course, he and we're different life stages, different life experience. So basically, he and I have different areas and strengths that we can go to. But then one of the things we've been doing in our gathering stage for the past few months is sitting down and having this group. Canon Melton coined it, or at least to me, I don't know if somebody else did it to him. We call them crucial conversations.
Yeah. Right.
And so we're sitting down every month. We do evening prayer, little devotional, little nice fellowship dinner, and we sit down and we talk about, you know, the basics. So we talked about, what is the Anglican Church, and then the next month, faith and doctrine. So we went over the 39 articles and the formularies. And then this coming month, we're going to talk about the liturgy. And part of it is to explain to a lot of people who maybe are coming in from a non-Anglican background, but it's also hopefully equipping them to have those conversations too, so
Right.
that what I'm doing trickles out into um, what other people are doing. I do remember I was really happy about this. We were at a social gathering. One of our core group families had this end of summer big party. So it wasn't a church plant party. It was lots of people, but people from our core group were there too. And I was just sitting there holding my youngest daughter, who's a year and a half, and I could hear one of our guys in the church plant a little while away just talking to these two other people, and I'm just listening. And he's just with his own personal style and ability to just
Yep.
conveying the stuff that we talked about in the crucial conversations. And I was like, gosh, this guy's got it.
Right. Man, thank you, because that is so important. Catechizing your people how to actually talk about who they are and what God is drawing them into. So it's because a lot of people coming into the tradition, I mean, you and your wife came, you came out of Presbyterianism, came into Anglicanism. I came out of the Roman Church, then I was in, kind of Bible churches. The language has to be, you have to get the language of being an Anglican. And so those crucial conversations, catechizing in the core group meetings, just being around your people in the mission, and they're listening. It's like children. They hear everything you say. And so it's so important to model that and continue to reinforce that. And even, as you said, formally teach people how to speak about these things by teaching them the answers and helping them understand it. I think that's crucial, because it's all foreign to people. They're enamored with Anglicanism. They are attracted to you and your family and what you're saying and a life that you're projecting and a way of being a Christian. But they've got a lot of language and a lot of ideas and concepts that they have to learn.
That's right. Yeah, and I think finding the right sequence, and I don't know, I'm sure that there's more than one way to do this, but what I kind of sensed in this area was, for example, we talked about doctrine before we talked about liturgy, because what I said to people is, I said, the liturgy is going to be alien to a lot of people. So
Yeah.
if we could just make sure we know what we believe, when people come in and say, all right, this is unfamiliar, this is a little strange, I wonder if these people believe the Bible is the final source of authority.
Yes.
I
Very
wonder what they believe about doctrine of justification. All these questions that, coming from a particular background, you're going to be wondering about. And so, we went through the formularies just to get the basics and say, these are probably some questions that we might take for granted, but it's probably good if they're coming into something that's unfamiliar to also be familiar to them, to say, we are Orthodox, Bible-believing Christians. We have a particular patrimony, but this is what we believe. And I think that's important. I think sometimes when we get excited, particularly coming from other Christian traditions, so it's like, I grew up knowing the Bible, knowing the, very well catechized. The temptation is to jump immediately to liturgy or sacramental theology, which is all important, but without realizing, okay, we need to reframe the basics first just to make sure.
Yeah. No, that's I found this to be the case. So we started a women's Bible study several years ago in the mission, and I was teaching that. So I was like unique because I was the only male Bible teacher in our community teaching women. But what I found is that we're in a Baptist context, we're in an evangelical Bible church context, Bible churches. And what I saw very early on was, like, if they don't think you know the Bible, you're not going to get anywhere. Now, they may not fully understand everything that like in terms of doctrine, but until they know, okay, well, this guy knows the scriptures, whatever that level of assurance is for them, you're really not going to move to the next step with certain people. And so this goes back to, I think, that exegeting the culture we talked about. Because there may be other contexts, and I know there are other contexts where, the scriptures are assumed, but like people aren't even thinking about the Bible, and maybe the first place is, well, what's your moral ethic? In maybe less Bible churchy contexts, or, they're enamored with and drawn by the beauty of the liturgy. They've never even read the Bible, right? So there are places like that, but I think it's a great point. I want to kind of turn. I don't want to keep you forever. I mean, I love talking. We could talk forever. I love talking about this stuff, but I want to maybe have you just think about three things: challenge, at this point, maybe current or one of the obstacles or challenges you're seeing, not in terms of something that's going to stop you, but something that you recognize you've got to push through. Maybe something that an instance that God has really brought a lot of delight and joy to you guys, your family, in this journey you're on, as an encouragement to people, and then maybe a piece of wisdom from what the Lord has given you as you've labored for Him there in Johnson City. So challenge. Let's start there.
Yeah, I think that the challenge we're at right now is it's kind of that weird middle intermediate phase of a gathering where we've got, I think we probably have, with people discerning, maybe some people are kind of praying through final discernment, but we're probably at or close to 15 households.
Wow.
Which then if you multiply the kids and everything, we are, whether it's our huddle groups once a month, we do meet once a month for Eucharist.
Hmm.
When we first got here in June, we could meet in somebody's living room.
Yep.
Um, and we're outgrowing that. So finding even just logistics, like we're at the stage, we're not at the stage where we're ready to find a building that we're going to meet in every week, but we need a place that we can accommodate, 40 or 50 people if everybody shows up.
Yep.
For once a month. So even the logistics in this stage, I think that can be a challenge. But at the same time, you think back and say, well, we have too many people to fit in a living room. That's a good problem to have.
Right.
But it is a challenge. It is a challenge. And related to that is, you want to it can lead to, just instinctually, it can lead to impatience. You're like, well, can we just go ahead and go to weekly worship? But
Yep.
then, it's helpful then when we get to these like huddle groups where everyone's just very informally, we're doing evening prayer and we're having these conversations and people are bringing their friends and family and
Yep.
and going, oh, we're building something here. And I think that's helpful to remind when I went through the Always Forward church planting training last fall, they said, you're not building a worship service, you're building a church.
Yep.
And so if you remind yourself of that, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge at this stage because it's this weird middle stage where, it's not really a numbers issue. It's just a question of patience and building the culture.
Yeah. No, that's a wise word. And it feels like things are in flux for a while as a church planner. It's always changing and progressing and moving and becoming something that it wasn't before. It's like a rapidly growing child, and so you have to be very nimble and adjust. But God brings people, right? He brings the people you need to help with those adjustments. Okay, so that's good. So the second thing, so maybe an instant of delight or a joy that God has given you guys.
One of the things that has been so funny about this journey is I had never even considered, I probably knew in theory that Johnson City, Tennessee was a place, but when Ken and Melton, wrote me about it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then very quickly, all of a sudden, all these people came out of the woodworks. My dad, who was, mission to the world missionary, said one of our biggest supporting churches is in there. I'll connect you with the people there.
Okay.
A parishioner at All Saints in Wilmington said, actually, I practiced law there for 20 years. Here's some numbers of some people you want to call.
You're kidding.
We had a good friend who had worked with us with Word, my wife and I, and during our Mission to the World days, I found out had relocated to this area. I got a call that somebody who went to college with my mother has moved here 7 years ago. So one of the things that's kind of a blessing was that when I looked at this area, it could have been, as far as my familiarity with it was, it could have been like going overseas, like as a kid. It was just not on my radar. And very quickly, God just has poured people into our lives, and connections. And I had no idea. I knew this many people in Johnson City.
Wow.
And that was a huge blessing in so many ways.
Well, and it from how you've spoken about Johnson City, I mean, I hear that, it sounds like you guys are falling in love with the place and, and the people.
It's great. Yeah, we really like it. Yeah, we're blessed to we're very blessed to be here. It's always a nice, God smiles when it's, you go where the work is,
Yeah.
but there's places that we would have probably been better suited to and others, and we're blessed that we found somewhere that this is a place where, we really feel that our family long term can thrive spiritually.
Hmm. That's fantastic. All right. Well, last, a word of wisdom from Father Alex, but, maybe just thinking about something that if a planter comes to you and says, "Hey, Father Alex, what should I do? How should I do it? Help me." Like, what's something you can pass to encourage our brothers and their families in planting churches?
I would say first of all, if you think that you're not called to church planting, um, give it a second thought. Maybe you're not, but give it a thought. I have said recently, I said if I knew now, no, excuse me, if I knew a year ago what I knew now, I mean, I would have I would have done maybe I would have done this sooner because
Hmm.
it would have been less intimidating. But I think related to that is find people who value church planting, value evangelism and discipleship. Find your bishops, your canons, find people to speak into your life because your context may be different. I was very blessed. I'm here. I already have an assisting priest and a core group, and you may be called to parachute somewhere, but don't go alone. Now that might look different,
Right.
but have your mentors, have your people who speak into your life, have people who can train you. And when you do it that way, it can be intimidating, but it can also be very edifying because you're not alone. And
Right.
it's yeah, so you might if you haven't thought about church planting, give it a second look, especially with REC 100, which has been my personal uh, experience.
Yeah, and I think that's a very wise word. In other words, don't determine God's plan for you on your own.
That's right.
I mean, get a second opinion,
That's right.
and talk to like you said, a fellow priest. Make sure you've spoken to your wife. Talk to your canon, bishop. That's really good. Well, I've enjoyed this. This has been great. And you are forever the first REC 100 podcast guest. So you'll go down in the annals of history as the greatest REC 100 podcast interview ever. So I appreciate your time, and
Sequels can probably improve, I'm sure, but
and I appreciate the work that you and your family are doing. And I know it's hard work, but it's an encouragement from where I'm sitting, and I know other people in the REC and even broader. When they see God working through a family like yours, it just reminds us that God's not done, and He's not done with the world. He's not done in our own lives. So it is an encouragement. Well, I know there will be a time, perhaps in the future, when we can have another conversation. But until then, I want to pray for you, and then I guess we'll go about our days. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the time we've had today. Thank you for calling us into the world to bring the gospel to bear upon all nations. Thank you for the gift of your church. Thank you for calling us into it. And I pray for Father Alex and his family and for the mission in Johnson City that you would give them grace and you would provide for them all that is needed, that you would bless the work of his hands, and that you would instill and preserve a joy, a gospel joy that is contagious to all those who they encounter. So be with him and his family, Lord, and protect them. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Well, we're going to put the some of the information about Johnson City Anglican Mission, and we're going to have a contact there where you can get a hold of Father Alex if you're interested to know more about the mission or the work they're doing, or you have some questions for him, or you just want to encourage him. So thank you for being with us today, and thank you, Father Alex, and God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Take care.